Hi, Sally.
Hi, Sally.
Well, we're back to talk about another celebrity chart. Last time we talked about Naomi Judd, and do you remember who we were kind of interested in, Sally, from Naomi's chart, who was almost a birthday twin?
Yes, so and she's who we're going to discuss today, very popular entertainer for many, many years, still going strong, and that's Dolly Parton. And I remember you had remembered that, she was just born about a week later after Naomi. So we thought, gee, we should look at her chart because she'd have, some similar planetary configurations, not necessarily in the same house, but planets that were traveling together. And they were born just about 4 hours, in distance. Their communities were very close together in Appalachian, similar backgrounds and so on.
Yeah. If they had been born in the same town, they would have gone to school together.
Right.
And graduated at the same time. So one thing in Naomi's chart we talked about was the Capricorn stellium, which in Naomi's chart was in her sixth house. Though that stellium is still present 8 days later in Dolly's chart. And then something else that is still present in Dolly's house was a pretty difficult Mars-Saturn conjunction. Saturn in its fall, in its detriment, and Mars in its fall in Cancer. And that's in Naomi's 12th house. But Dolly having a different ascendant, those aspects will be different, fall differently in her chart. Okay, so here is Dolly's chart. So I don't know, what do you think is different about the Capricorn stellium in her chart compared to Naomi's?
Well, yeah, we can see her stellium is in the fifth house, which is the house of creativity. I think Venus is at the house of joy in traditional astrology in the fifth house. And, obviously Mercury's there too. And so it's more of a fun house really than the sixth house, right?
Yeah, the sixth house is, a lot of work and no play. And Naomi's life sure showed that even though she had great heights in her life, she certainly struggled, with her work and then with her health and with her mental health. So the sun, sees the ascendant by trine in Dolly's chart. She's a Virgo rising. And so it works very well with this Capricorn stellium, whereas Naomi having a Leo rising, all of those Capricorn planets were in aversion. So that creates kind of a stress between the sun trying to express itself in this person's life.
I've read where actually people with a lot of planets in the sixth house, many times they are nurses. Have you ever read that?
Yeah.
And so Naomi spent time as a nurse, and apparently was very good, very empathetic individual as well. But she had to work very hard. It was more of a working house for her, right? In that respect.
And the struggle as being a single mother and supporting children, which Dolly has never had. So her road was a lot longer and harder than Dolly's was, even though both of them Capricorn ladies, both of them, like crazy, both very ambitious, but Dolly's life just kind of went on a different path. And so you can see all that creativity just bubbling away in her. She's written, I don't know, hundreds of songs by now, wouldn't you think?
I didn't realize what a prolific writer, songwriter and lyricist she is until more recently. I think it's, she's been around a long time, right? And so, it's definitely more, people are more aware of it, I think, especially people that weren't necessarily strong fans of the country music world, perhaps.
Yeah. And then that Saturn-Mars conjunction in Naomi's house was, I don't know, how would you describe that? It's very hidden. But
yeah, well, isn't it true that the 12th house is often described as very internal, can be more difficult in traditional astrology, isn't it? The house of hidden enemies. So
Mhm.
that kind of described a lot what was happening with Naomi's chart, and her struggles with mental illness, where Dolly still has those malefics, but it's a little more tempered, in the 11th house.
Yeah, it's almost more like it's out in the open and you can deal with it, whereas something that's in the 12th house is more hidden. And it was interesting, after we did our last video, we both watched an interview or a presentation with Naomi where she talked about the history in her family and all the mental illness there was, and suicide and crimes.
And she would have had a Scorpio 4th house, is that right? Where Dolly has the Sag 4th
Right.
house.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of, Scorpio can be a little bit more challenging. Sagittarius being ruled by Jupiter. And in Dolly's chart, it's very prominent Jupiter. And so I feel like maybe Dolly's family history was a little bit more upbeat.
Yeah, even though they were poor, I think it was a very loving family and supportive. And that sure, a Jupiter IC or Mars, Sagittarius IC ruled by Jupiter, you can just see, a house just full of kids.
Exactly.
And so, and plus Jupiter ruling her IC, just getting that love and support from her family, whereas Mars ruling Naomi's IC, just a lot of difficulty and people even working against her. So anyway, that's just a good example of
really interesting to compare the two charts.
Yeah.
Of people that were born in somewhat similar circumstances and at about the same time.
Yeah, and just where the planets are placed in the chart, they have their dignity according to the sign they're in, but also there's the accidental dignity of what house they're in. And so you can see that, especially having that Venus here in her 5th house, like you said, in its joy, just kind of puts Dolly's life on a less difficult path than Naomi's. So anyway, stepping back then and looking at Dolly's chart, we look at this, we've looked at the 5th house and the creativity that just seems to bubble out of her. What about all of those 5th house planets being in Capricorn, though?
Well, I look at Capricorn as about achievement, structure, discipline, and certainly, she's put in the work, and I think she's definitely transferred her creativity to, something viable, right? That's something out in the world. She does have that connection to the 11th house there, with those planets, even though they might be sort of difficult. They do relate to each other. And so, Dolly is definitely an achiever for sure.
Yeah, she doesn't hide her light under a bushel. And also you think about Capricorn being longevity. She's just not a couple of hit songs and she's gone. She's had decades as an enormously popular singer and performer and actress. So that's another signature, I think, of the Capricorn in her chart. And Naomi too, they both had longevity when it came to their careers. And then also another thing that people think about with Dolly Parton is her look. She just doesn't roll out of bed and go perform.
Right. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about Dolly, right? And anytime she's interviewed, it seems like, whether it's Oprah or, Johnny Carson years ago, I mean, they're always commenting on her look. And she's actually a beautiful, beautiful woman without the makeup. And, maybe she's had some surgeries. I think she does admit to that, cosmetic surgery. but you know, she's naturally beautiful, and she's got that Virgo rising, which is indicative of some of the most beautiful women in the world, actually, are frequently Virgo rising people. But you know, with Virgo as the rising sign, Virgo can be kind of, you know, a little more critical, analytical, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
And perhaps well, I think there's two ideas maybe about Dolly with her appearance. I think on the one hand, I think it is part of her shtick. But on the other hand, she may feel like, you know, there's always kind of room for improvement. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure on her, you know, as a performer and somebody who's televised and so on, to look her very best.
Yeah, and you can see that even if she's in kind of a casual interview in her own home, she looks great. So she's one of these people who just does not leave the house until she has her look together, which I think is very Virgo too. And you think about Virgo as being a good crafts person. And so you can see that even though I'm sure she has people who help her with her hair and makeup, she herself, though, knows how to do hair. You could see that in the movie Steel Magnolias, where she played a hairdresser.
Oh, right.
You could see she was really at home, you know, doing somebody's hair. So even though she probably has a lot of professional help, I think she also, in the beginning especially, just learned how to do the makeup and hair and put the clothes together, what clothes suited her best. I think she got to a point when she was a little heavier than she wanted to be. So she got herself to the weight where she felt good and kept it there. So all very Virgo things, I think, too.
Virgo relating to health.
Yeah. And so that being able to craft her look. But
right.
The moon there in the first house. Now, one thing, this is just kind of a lighthearted comment here, but when people talk about Dolly Parton, they usually talk about her breasts. And of course, the moon right here in the first house does rule the breasts. So it's kind of interesting that that's one of the signatures. But she doesn't, I don't know, she has a great attitude towards it, don't you think?
Yeah, and that's why I feel it, you know, it's kind of part of her persona. And that moon in the first house there, I think that's why, you know, people love Dolly Parton, and she's kind of out there, her emotions. It's a little, you know, what you see is what you get. I think, I mean, that's the impression, or she's relatable to people, and the moon often represents the public.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, just that people see her and they love her.
Right. So I think that's interesting that she does have the moon in the first house, and would certainly help explain her popularity as well as, you know, appreciating her talent.
And then she makes it, she's the first one to make a joke about herself. And so
that's where people appreciate that, right?
Yeah, that
she's
Virgo,
human.
Yeah, that you think about Virgos being critical, but the moon can be kind of loony, you know, loony. And so she just has a great sense of humor about herself, and is usually the first one to be making a joke about herself. And so, yeah, that's very disarming, and people love that about her.
I think that the looniness also, or the uniqueness, can also maybe be explained by that Uranus right next to the midheaven up there in the 10th. I mean, she's definitely a unique person, right? I don't know anybody who's really like Dolly Parton. I mean,
yeah, totally unique.
She's very unique. And so I think that sort of explains maybe some of her charm as well.
Yeah, that's that Uranus midheaven in Gemini, you know, again, ruled by Mercury down here in that Capricorn stellium, not too far from Venus. So again, you know, making her career being creative. And then also just having that electricity. You think about Uranus as being charisma. People really just are drawn to her. And what's interesting is that it's not like she has a fan base. I mean, everybody loves her. Old, young, conservative, liberal. So it just, she's not a polarizing figure at all, which might be kind of go to this. she's got a strong Jupiter in Libra. So
right.
that might be part of it too, that she just kind of knows how to appeal to people at a certain level that's not polarizing.
So with that T square in her chart, right? So
Mhm.
Jupiter is at the focal point there.
Right.
And so that's and the T square, my understanding is that at that focal point, Jupiter, so it's with the 11th house, right?
Mhm.
It's Cancer,
Mhm.
and then and then the Capricorn. So house, but a lot of that energy is focused on that Jupiter in Libra.
Yeah, and I think as we tell the stories about some of the transits, we'll see that Jupiter come into play more than once. But it also comes into play when we're talking about kind of a mystery in Dolly's life, which which is a question we've been asking a lot.
Well, don't you think that, I mean, people are always curious about what about Dolly's husband, right? So people know she's married, but it's like he's definitely in the background. In all the interviews, she talks about how he likes to be very private. And I don't think a lot is really known about him, you know, but obviously they have a good marriage. It's an enduring marriage. She's still married to this day. And I think she met him when she was 18 years old. But typically we'd look at the 7th house for partnership, right?
Mhm.
And then Mars, maybe what she might be as a female, who she might be looking for, or the qualities she might be looking for
Mhm. And that
in his
Jupiter
house,
too.
and the Jupiter with the Libra
Mhm.
in Libra. So yeah, and with that Pisces energy in the 7th house, she's looking for that energy in a partner, right?
Yeah.
That she wants. And I think of Pisces as sort of elusive, a little mysterious, kind of Neptunian. Neptune's the
Yeah, someone who kind of
modern
goes with the
moon.
flow too, is very adaptable. Because I mean, being Dolly Parton's married, she would be a roller coaster, right? As far as what's going on in her professional life.
Right. And she has mentioned in interviews that, I think he is very accommodating to her career and allows her to be who she is. And again,
Mhm.
that Uranus conjunct the midheaven plays a part probably. I did glance at his chart. There's no birth time that I saw, but I noticed that he's got the Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter in Cancer, which might sort of modify those malefics in her chart. So when you do a synastry and overlap that, he's providing some very positive Cancer energy.
Yeah, especially that Jupiter that's exalted in Cancer, putting that great benefic with the malefics in her chart. I can see, like you say, that would temper it.
And she may be looking for somebody that can kind of be at home, sort of man the home fires there.
Yeah, that she says, oh, the lawn people need to come do the landscaping or something, and he's there to take care of it. Or, he makes sure that things are repaired in the house, and, and also a Capricorn is putting themselves out into the world, so intensely that they need to counterbalance it sometimes with that Cancer. Sometimes they just need to go home and, take their shoes off and kind of go, nobody needs anything from me here. I can just be.
So don't you think that's probably what he's sort of providing for her, and why they've been married this long and had a successful marriage from what
Yeah,
we
I think
understand?
so. And another thing we kind of speculated about was that, she's a very beautiful woman, very flirtatious. And we were thinking, that Jupiter rules her 7th house, which is Venus ruled, which is kind of under the beams of her sun here. And I'm almost wondering if that sort of is her kind of I don't know, kind of a protection for her. These guys are hitting on me throughout my career, but I can always at the end of the day say, oh, well, it was so fun talking to you, but I've got to go home to my husband.
I think that's an excellent point. And particularly when she started in her career, in the 60s, you would, and in a very patriarchal kind of culture. She was in Nashville, country music world, the South. So you would think that that protection could be helpful to her. So
Yeah.
she can flirt on stage or whatever, but people know it's not serious because she's married. And
Yeah. And
she met him very early on, really before she became famous.
yeah, and maybe that helps too, that he didn't, he fell in love with her, not with, Dolly Parton, the mega star. And so I think for anyone who becomes very rich and famous, that having that person who loved them before all that happened would mean a lot. Because, they just wanted you for you.
Right. No, that's really true.
Well, so anyway, let's look at some of the transits in her life, because she got started right out of the gate, right, with her career.
So, yeah, and I think she was a child performer actually, but she tells a story. She graduated from high school in 1964 in yeah, she lived in Tennessee, right? I think it was Sevierville County High School in Sevierville, if that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, the day after she graduated from high school, she went to Nashville, and she left so quickly. She had a lot of laundry to do, speaking of her husband, and she was at the laundromat and met her husband that day. So it was literally the day after she graduated from high school, goes to the laundromat, meets her husband. I mean, who does that happen to?
And starts her country music career.
Right. But she knew she wanted to be famous. She knew that she was, I think she knew she was destined to be a star.
Yeah, I think you're right. She just, at that time, this in 1964 was when we were starting to get that pileup of Uranus and Pluto, that conjunction, which was very powerful and led to a great deal of cultural change in the 60s. But look where it is in her chart. Like right between the moon and her ascendant. And so I'm sure it probably took everything that she had just to stay and finish her final classes and graduate. She was probably just so anxious to get going. And so I don't know, what would you think about Uranus and Pluto, crossing your moon and your ascendant in the first house?
Well, big changes. And very prominent. Yeah, transformational, very prominent.
And wanting to be
being in the first house and
wanting to be independent.
Wanting to be independent.
Yeah. And natally in her chart, she has that Uranus at 13 degrees Gemini, which is square the descendant ascendant line, which, might make her want to be a little more independent in marriage. But also, Uranus was squaring itself and Pluto was right there with it when she had this. So normally people around this age do have a Uranus square that makes them want to be more independent of especially of their family, and start putting together their own lives. But when Pluto is there with it, it's just like it drills it into you. It's just so intense, that need to.
And we've talked about the creativeness that she has natally in that fifth house, and Uranus Pluto would be super creative, inventive. So she is destined to make her mark, I think, and start that.
And over the next years, it will be creating a trine to her Capricorn stellium. So it's only going to be making her talent and her ability to write songs and to perform just grow and grow and grow. So really a super powerful time. And interesting, she met her husband, Saturn, right here. in her seventh house, opposite her moon. And so it's kind of interesting that on one side, she's getting, all lit up, as far as what she wants to do with her life. And over here on the other side is, a very stable partner coming into her life. So it's like,
and that's an important point about the Saturn. You can think of Saturn sometimes negatively in terms of relationships, but it really adds a lot of stability, and permanence. So there was definitely a commitment going on there.
Yeah, I would tell people, do not fear Saturn going through your seventh house. It can be a time when you do find a really stable partner, or you're just more serious about marriage, and so you attract it. And Dolly was of a generation too where women tended to marry after high school. So, that probably it's not like he just convinced her to get married. It was probably an idea that, she saw other girls her age doing.
Right.
So super impactful time for her. And then she's kind of struggling away in Nashville, and she gets a really great opportunity to appear on a TV show of a country western singer named Porter Wagoner. And now, is that a name that you had known at all?
I had a vague recollection of, his TV show, in the 60s, but, I didn't really follow it particularly. But, since you and I've spoken and, we've done a little more research on Dolly, being more aware of really what happened with that has been kind of interesting to look at.
Yeah. And he was a well-known country western singer. And, back then country music wasn't popular. It had a certain niche audience. And so he was located in Nashville and had a show there that among country western fans was considered a very good show. And so he hired Dolly on as his girl singer. And she was all of what, was she 21 years old in 67 when this happened? And so you can see this is the date, September 5th, 1967 was the date of her first appearance on Porter Wagoner's show. And so what was going on in Dolly's chart?
Wow, look at all those planets in the first house.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, wow.
The world is going to see me,
Now, and would that be, let's see. So she's got the Venus right on her moon.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yeah. The sun is right on, transiting sun is right on her ascendant, or very close, and then Pluto, Mercury, Uranus, all. So that was a big occasion for her.
Yeah, and again, emphasizing that trine to her Capricorn planets. And Mercury 23, Uranus 24, both applying to a trine to that Venus. So, wow, I mean, and the moon was in Libra, right on her Neptune. So just, you can see that her time had come.
And they did a lot of duets, right? And I think Dolly did have or she signed with another record company before she joined Porter's show. And then she traveled with him too, when they would do performances. But then I think she switched over. Did she switch over to his record company?
I think so, because they recorded together.
Yeah.
So what happened when Dolly joined up with him was that he was all of a sudden, not just a country western singer, but a popular recording artist. They were selling, gold albums. They were touring. They were winning Grammys. I mean, being with Dolly lifted him up into a whole other level of show business, person of cachet and income and fame. So ended up being, a super good deal for him.
And I read where she had agreed to be with him for 5 years.
Mhm.
But then later on, after 7 years, she wanted to leave.
And you can see in the first show, the seed is there. That Saturn in her eighth house, other people's resources, and it's going to come up to square, eventually it will oppose her Jupiter and square her Capricorn and Cancer planets. So even though you think about the eighth house as being contracts. So even though this is a wonderful opportunity for her to grow as an artist and get some recognition, it also put her under contract, and that sort of Saturn control was starting to happen at that time. So anyway, so then she wants to leave, right? After 7 years, she's saying, I need to be on my own. I just feel it. And Porter Wagner was having none of that, right? He was just like, Dolly had essentially made his new career. He's become enormously wealthy and famous being with Dolly. And his attitude, I don't know, his attitude was really pretty much sucked, didn't it?
So that sort of illustrates the Mars Saturn in her 11th house, right?
Yeah, I think that's when it kicked in, because he thought, I made you, I gave you an opportunity to be on my TV show, and in a sense, I own you. And, that's just not the way the world works. Whatever he had given her, she had given him back.
Interesting how that transit in Chiron is squaring, in the eighth.
Mm-hmm.
Chiron in the eighth is squaring those two planets.
Exactly. Yeah, right. And that the house of contracts. And so this is when Dolly recorded the song, I Will Always Love You. She's still with Porter Wagner. They're having a horrible fight. She wants to leave and he's telling her she can't go.
Yeah. And actually this is the date. Obviously she knew she was going to be going, but I think she actually left the show officially the next year.
Right. So she hasn't left the show yet, but they're fighting.
Okay. Right. But they are fighting. And she did write the song for Porter Wagner. Mm-hmm. And probably many people know this song from the Whitney Houston version of I Will Always Love You. Mm-hmm. And very, well-known rendition of it. And this song has made Dolly awfully rich. And I didn't know, did you know that she had written that song or did you remember when Whitney?
Not until I recently, I think we both saw the same Netflix special that talked about Whitney Houston singing it. And if I knew Dolly Parton had written that song, I had forgotten it.
Yeah, but she had written that for Porter, basically so that he would be sort of soothed and he would sort of let her go off the show. And I guess she in one interview I read where he cried, when she performed it for him. And he said something to the effect that I'll let you go if I can produce it. But as you mentioned to me before we talked today, Sally, he actually ended up suing Dolly later.
Yeah, we'll look at that separation chart next, but this is she's just singing her heart out. Please, I love you. I appreciate everything you've done for me, but to grow, I need to go. It's almost like a daughter to a father. And, he's just kind of holding on to her, almost parasitically. And you can see that when she recorded this song, she had Jupiter on her part of fortune. And she also had Venus was, as you can see right here on the south node, the transiting south node, squaring that Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
And in her second house. And so, it's a song about loss, wanting to let go, wanting someone else to let go. Just a very beautiful song. And she said it just sort of came to her. And you think about that Neptune square being kind of almost divinely given to her, that song. And that song ended up becoming an enormous gift to Dolly. Do you remember the story about Elvis Presley?
Yes, I do. I read where Elvis Presley wanted to record the song at one point. But the deal was with Elvis, if he did any recording, he wanted half the publishing rights, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And so Dolly, she was distraught, but in the end, she thought, you know what, I'm not going to give that up. And so that was very fortuitous for her with that Venus Neptune. There actually helped her,
yeah,
monetarily for sure.
That was in the South Node. She had to give up, Elvis, who was at that time probably the
king.
The king. So having to give up, she said, just about killed her. But then, I don't know, a decade later or so, along came the movie The Bodyguard, and they were looking for something for Whitney Houston to sing in The Bodyguard. And then, the song became absolutely a mega hit and made Dolly wealthy many times over. And if she had given up those rights to the song, Lisa Marie Presley would now have taken half of that. So
right. Exactly. But that was, again, I mean, that was a smart move. Dolly's first single was entitled Dumb Blonde, but she's not dumb, and she was able to kind of stand up for her rights. And again, that Saturn Mars conjunction in the 11th, you could say that was a little illustration of her dealings with Elvis. And and she obviously respected him and everything, and I'm sure there was some pressure, or some thought that, gee, if Elvis recorded my song, wouldn't that add to my prominence?
That's the dream, probably,
but in the end, she stood up for it. So that was really smart. And Dolly herself, later on, I know she did a duet with Vince Gill. I kind of got sidetracked listening to some of these songs on YouTube, of her hits and so on. And I think they won an award for that. And so I know Linda Ronstadt recorded it, but she didn't have she was missing some of the verses.
She left out the third verse when she recorded it. And Dolly, I think, before Whitney Houston performed it, did she mention it to David? Who was
Foster? Yeah, I think David Foster probably had to call her to maybe allow Whitney to record this for the movie. I would assume that's how it went down. But I remember him saying in that program that we both watched that Dolly had mentioned these missing lyrics, because it was, I think, Kevin Costner, who was in the movie, had also heard the Linda Ronstadt version of the song. And Dolly said, wait a minute, she left out some very important lyrics. So
if you find I've been unkind, that part where Whitney kind of talks
yes, that's probably what.
And that's the part that really sells the song.
Right.
Yeah, when Whitney does that. So
yeah, that was an interesting tidbit there with David Foster's comments.
But so Dolly's learning to stand up for herself, and I think it was probably going through the crucible of separating from Porter Wagner that really kind of gave her the backbone she needed for the rest of her career to always stand up for herself and for her vision and what she wanted for her career. And so
look at that Saturn on the North Node there, there.
Wow. So this was the date it was announced she was leaving Porter Wagner to go have a solo career. Yeah, so Saturn, right? And the North Node amplifies. So she was, that's grit right there, Saturn on your North Node. And look at Pluto is approaching that Neptune,
Uranus, right there on the Jupiter.
Yeah,
and
wow.
Uranus.
And that's squaring the Venus Sun
Mhm.
conjunction. Venus is right here on Venus. So that's Dolly's birth as a solo artist. Even this Jupiter at 26 Aquarius, making a trine to itself. And so, this was her declaration of independence. And it wasn't easy for her to leave him. It's not like she just went flying out the door and had this wonderful career. She had to struggle because Porter Wagner went around and just trashed her everywhere he could.
Now
And
you had watched or listened to a
there was
podcast.
a podcast about this. Yeah. And I think it's like an 8-part or 9-part podcast on Dolly Parton's America. And so she has spoken quite extensively about this now that Porter Wagner has passed away, but he sued her. And, he was almost like they had gotten divorced and he just wanted not only everything she had, but everything that she would make in the future. I mean, it was almost like a vindictive ex-husband. And so she had to settle big money on him just to kind of make it all go away. But fortunately, I think when you have Jupiter in the second house, that kind of gives you an abundance mindset, don't you think?
Right. And a generosity.
Yeah, that I will give away this money because I can make more.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, she grew up so poor where they had nothing and there were 12 children. So I think you would come out of that with a sense of an abundance mindset that, somehow what you need is going to be provided to you.
Right. And again, that's a real focus point for her, that Jupiter.
Yeah. And so
it's ruling her fourth house, her, the deepest sense of self.
Yeah. Yeah. And so she had that, even though,
and we can see that generosity in her philanthropic work, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And Uranus was rattling it right here. And that's the apex of her T-square. So it was a difficult time for her, but she prevailed, and even after she paid him off, and went on and she had a successful solo career, he blew through all the money he got in the settlement. At the end of his life, he had nothing. He was dying. And so she ended up contributing, I think, some songwrites or something to him so that his children would have an inheritance from their father. So
I think they did kind of also, didn't they meet and reconcile? Not too long.
I think,
mm-hmm.
She went to visit him, and when he was in the
hospital. Definitely was the bigger person, I would say, in that instance.
Yeah, because she just had that sense of, I will give you what you need, but just let me go away.
And that's the thing. I mean, I'm sure she was very grateful for the start. And, at that time, particularly there, you kind of relied on men to sort of give you an opportunity many times, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure she felt grateful, but after promising 5 years and staying for 7 years, she wasn't going to be held down to the wrong person.
And don't you think when someone has Uranus right up there in their
I was just thinking that, exactly.
Freedom is their byword,
It is.
I gotta be free. And especially when it squares your ascendant.
Mm-hmm.
Just if she had to give away every single penny and every, thing she owned to get her freedom, she probably would have.
Well, it's definitely very prominent in her chart, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And so she did go through another very difficult time that we can talk about briefly before we wrap up. In the early 80s, I don't know, she was describing several things, right, that were going on in her life in the early 80s.
Well, remember 1980, I believe, was when she filmed the film 9 to 5 with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. And that was her first foray into being a film star, an actress. So I think, she enjoyed that experience. But then I remember reading, she was in that movie with Burt Reynolds. I think it's Little Whorehouse in Texas or something. And she talked about how there was a lot of difficulty then. and that filming wasn't as pleasant. I can't remember the details on exactly why, but she may not have been feeling that great health-wise, or perhaps that influenced her health at the time.
Yeah, she'd had some, she was from the generation where you didn't go into detail about these things, but she always said she had female troubles.
Yes, and I do remember seeing a Oprah Winfrey interview with her, and she called them, yeah, women's troubles or whatever. But we're thinking that that was probably maybe endometriosis or fertility
Yeah,
issues, possibly. She was 36 at that time, I think.
yeah.
30s. So if you're going to have children, which again, you know, in that house, the fifth house is representative of children, and you know, she didn't she didn't end up giving birth to any children.
Mhm. And
So, but
you
there
can
were some
imagine,
health issues, maybe.
you can
fertility.
imagine she probably wanted children with all that fifth house energy. In fact, she said, you know, she was sorry that she
Yeah,
didn't.
I don't think, I never got the impression she was like, I'm not planning to have any children. Again, I'm just wondering, you know, with those good planets in the fifth, you'd think, and it's in an earth sign, which I understand is considered more on the fertile end of things. But again, she's got the malefics across the
Yeah,
way.
that might be
And
another
so,
way that they're kind of working in her.
right, working against her with in that regard. So we don't have the exact date per se, but you chose her birthday, right?
Yeah, her birthday,
1982.
1982, which she said was a difficult year, because that year she did have a partial hysterectomy and she had a lot of depression. And so you can see her naturally buoyant Jupiter, you know, ruled by Venus, was receiving, this was a time of another Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And it was crossing that Jupiter, setting off the T-square. So you can see how this would have been a heartbreaking time for her. When she lost any option, she had to have children. You know, Jupiter is her marriage planet. It might have been a difficult time for them as a couple, you know, facing this. So you can see that while she's had many, many blessings in her life, that loss of being able to have children was very difficult for her.
And she did recover quite a bit, and she lost quite a bit of weight. I was looking at photographs of her roughly 1982 and then 1984. It looked like she had lost quite a bit of weight. And I know in the Oprah interview, of course, Oprah was very interested in the diet stuff that Dolly was saying that she was doing, you know, and anyway, Dolly was pretty disciplined about it and talked about eating these small meals. But there's definitely a difference in her weight when you look at, you know, 1980 to I think 1984-ish, 1985.
Yeah, and it could be that too, that once she was no longer dealing with female troubles, you know, she was able to regulate her diet a little better too. She might have had a lot of problems with bloating and things.
And with that Virgo rising, you know, she was concerned about her health and wanted to kind of take charge of that, I think, too.
And it's kind of interesting that Virgo is considered a barren sign. So for what it doesn't mean if you have moon in Virgo, you're not going to have children, but that's probably kind of contributing to the picture here in Dolly's chart. But, you know, she's had a lot of children in her life. Of course, nieces and nephews, but something else started growing in her life, an interest in children, which began probably around this time that she was having her hysterectomy. You know, her father had never been able to read.
Oh, is that, I didn't know that I was going to say, it seemed like in 1986, so she would have been about 40, she seemed to come into another bit of her stride, and because she formed that Dollywood. And then as an offshoot of that, she formed her kind of philanthropic arm, and I forget what it was called, Imagination
Library.
So she's furnishing books for 1 million children, they get it up to the age of 5. I'm not sure which children they are, but I think it's throughout the world. They get a book every month until age 5.
Mhm.
And so, of course, that's how she's one of the ways that she's connecting with children. And I also read she said, if she ever thought she'd make it, she was going to do something big, in her community and in the world. And I think that Dollywood, that's kind of a fun, creative venture
Yeah,
too.
very
wouldn't you
fifth
say?
house. Yeah, yeah, very fifth house, and a theme park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she
Yeah,
took over, I think, an existing theme park and expanded it. And, when you mentioned the whole craft part of the Virgo element that she has featured in her chart with the AC and the moon, I think one of the things that they do at Dollywood is focus on crafts that are indicative of that area of the Smoky Mountains where she grew up.
yeah, and kind of gave jobs to people in that area and brought tourist dollars in, and also you think about Mars is being in the house of other people's children, the 11th house, and Mars rules her house of the 3rd house, which would be her community, but also reading. And so that she found a way to kind of give back, and to, in a sense, kind of help nurture children.
And I think that did start with, and I think she still gives scholarships, but she did want to promote reading within her more local community. It started out like that, and then it kind of grew into this international effort with the books for children.
Yes, so you can see how out of that heartbreak, I'm sure she probably, once she kind of picked herself up and got over her disappointment, realized that there are lots of children in the world that I can make a difference to, and a lot of people too. And so it's kind of interesting how that Cancerian energy, through difficulty and loss, she was able to become, this very benevolent, very giving, almost a mother to a lot of people.
And she we figured she's probably involved with her nieces and nephews, with that many siblings that she had. There must be other children in her immediate family that look up to her and that she helps too.
Yeah. And so, and Dolly was recently in the news in the last couple of years because not only is she, now just her fame has grown and she's loved all over the world and she performs everywhere. But she just kind of her name became very prominent during the pandemic. Do you remember?
Yeah, well, my understanding, and I was really surprised, but I saw her get the shot, the Moderna shot. So she helped fund the research that went into developing the Moderna vaccination for COVID.
Yeah, and so this is the date, November 17th, 2020. So it was right before vaccinations were generally administered. I think that was in December it started. So in November, it was announced that she had donated $1 million to Vanderbilt Medical Center there in Nashville to help develop the Moderna vaccine. And so this is the day of the announcement that her generosity had helped produce one of the first vaccines. And so what do we see happening in her life at that time?
Well, she's got a lot of 5th house transits there. Again, her creative generosity, again, with that T-square, or the Saturn on her sun right there, and her Venus, and then she's got the Venus conjunct the Jupiter there. Again, very generous individual.
Yeah, it's kind of like this is the COVID, what's called the COVID cluster, when we had Pluto, Jupiter in its fall in Capricorn, and Saturn all lined up together, traveling, across the sky, and the world was locked down and many people were ill, and it was a very fearful time. And so it's kind of interesting that all of this lands on Dolly's Capricorn stellium in her fifth house. So she brought light, she brought hope through her generosity. And it was definitely a bright moment, in late 2020 when that announcement came, that the vaccine was, just about ready to be administered. And did you say she was one of the first people to get it?
Well, I'm not sure if she was the first one to get the Moderna shot, but I remember she was, I remember seeing it on TV where I think I don't know what his title was, but I think he was affiliated with Vanderbilt and was probably one of the scientists working on it there. And he gave her the shot. I think he sort of fumbled it a little bit or dropped something, and she made some joke. Or she was wearing this cute little top that, the shoulder is down. And but she's like, come on, people, this is no big deal, in her charming little accent. And
it's interesting too, she must have felt very strongly about this because she tends not to be a polarizing figure. She doesn't support political candidates. And so that she took a stand on this issue of vaccines was, I think, really significant too for her, which might be that Saturn approaching her sun, that sense of public responsibility.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Yeah, and so it's also kind of typical of Dolly that, she was a performer, and I'm sure she lost a lot of performance, opportunities to perform in 2020. And, because anyone who was in any sort of show business was really hurting during the lockdown. And so she was just said, like, what can I do? And so, this is something I can do to help. So taking lemons and turning it into lemonade, definitely Dolly style. Okay, so we've covered Dolly's life to date, and we always like to close with a prediction. And so we were thinking, she's like Naomi, she's going to be having Uranus return in a few years. And so because Uranus is featured so prominently in her chart, right up there with her midheaven, square her ascendant, when Uranus is coming back to her midheaven and itself, it will be in July of 2028. And so my first thought was, Dolly's going to go into outer space. I don't know how likely that would be. What do you think? If she'll actually go into outer space?
I don't know if she'll actually go, but maybe something that she created will go out into outer space, maybe.
Maybe settling.
She is with all that Gemini energy up there, it's communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something will be maybe communicated either in a different type of technology or, I think it's fun to speculate outer space, Sally, with the Uranus.
They'll have the first Mars station, and they'll have like a little Dollywood or something.
That would be fun.
Or, another thing, virtual reality, the technology is becoming.
Okay, there you go.
More and more. So I'm thinking, well, maybe there'll be like a virtual reality game or whatever you would call it, where you could sing a duet with Dolly Parton.
That would be fun. That would definitely be fun.
She sings a lot of duets, but yeah, I think you're right. Just something to do with technology, getting out into the public, Gemini communicating. So I think we're going to be hearing some exciting things about Dolly in the summer of 2028. And the only other thing I would kind of watch out for in the next couple of years is Saturn crossing her sun. And, not all of us have that aspect, but when we do have it, it is pretty impactful. I don't know, do you have any things you would speculate, Sally, with
Oh gosh, I don't know. I hate to speculate, but yeah, with the sun at the 29th degree too, that's kind of an interesting configuration. I mean, she was definitely destined to express that creativity. And with Saturn, usually there is some challenge, some kind of challenges there, but I don't know if I really I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, the Pluto sun is something breaks down, but something's rebuilt. I know when my husband went through that aspect, Pluto crossing his sun, he just ended one career and started another. So, it's not like,
Oh yeah, we were talking about, I'm sorry, yeah, Pluto crossing the sun, not Saturn. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, to me, if Pluto crosses the sun, if this is your chance to really truly express who you are, and then if something isn't working right, like you said,
yeah.
then you're going to be facing challenges and stuff. Yeah.
And also maybe
So, and then
her legacy.
Pluto enters Aquarius in 2025. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, for good in 2024. It's back and forth in next year and in 2024. So she's going to have it going back and forth here. At the time we're predicting, in 2028, it'll be close to trining her midheaven. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wonder if maybe something will change, but something else will be born. It could be she's just more interested in her legacy and maybe starts projects where her songs are archived. And yeah, lots of, if I would just watch the next couple of years in the news to see what's going on with Dolly Parton. And then mark your calendar for July of 2028 and see if you can sing a duet with Dolly Parton via virtual reality devices.
That's a good one.
Okay, well, we should stop by just saying thank you to Dolly for just being such an awesome person. Wasn't this fun talking about her?
Yeah, well, like we said, I mean, she's just such an upbeat, very appealing person, very generous. I don't know anyone who doesn't like her, and she's just very real, even though she has some fake stuff about her appearance. I think her soul is real. Let's put it that way.
She's just an amazing spirit in the world, and I just think we're lucky that we had her, or that we have her. And I think she inspires a lot of people. So we'll be talking over the next month to see who we can bring to you, what chart we'll bring to you next. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can always leave them in the comments below. And we thank everyone for listening. Take care. Bye, Sally.
Bye, Sally. Bye.